What's up, YouTube? My name is Ray Oliva.
And I'm Chris Harris, and you're watching Blanket Face TV News by the Minute.
This is the show on the internet where we cover a bunch of different news topics that happened in the past week that we care about and want to tell you about.
At about a minute at a time, but that usually doesn't happen.
Now, with that being said, let's get to it.
Sports.
So earlier today, Conor McGregor tweeted this. Immediately, all UFC fans were freaking out, including me. Two theories came about pretty instantly with this. One, Conor McGregor's having an argument with the UFC and this is a power move. Two, maybe he just wants to retire young, like in his 30s or something. It was one. Yeah, it was theory one. Yeah, it was theory number one. So eventually we found out what the conflict was. Conor McGregor was scheduled to compete in UFC 200 against Nate Diaz, who he lost to in UFC 196. And he is very determined not to lose again. He's training in Iceland. There are a bunch of promotional events in Vegas. Dana White insisted that he come to them because they're mandatory for all fighters. Every other fighter on the card was going. In fact, Nate Diaz is going to arrive in Vegas tonight with his entire team to schedule a brand new fight. Conor McGregor said no way. He's not going to stop training under any circumstances because he has to win this fight. And eventually it was just a combatance of power moves. Dana White, who is president of the UFC, said, "I'll pull you from the card." Conor McGregor said, "I'll retire." Guess what? Both happened. Just an hour ago, Dana White came live on SportsCenter to say that he had talked to Conor. He said that he still thought he was a good person, but he did have to yank him from the fight because he refused to show up to those promotional events. Now I'm not frustrated at either side because I like Conor, but he's obviously wrong, and I like Dana, but I really don't like him right now. I'm frustrated at the situation. I needed UFC 200 with Conor McGregor in it. I needed to see this rematch. This is going to mean bad things for the UFC because, honestly, nobody's going to watch UFC 200 if there's not a McGregor-Diaz fight. Now, in the past, there's been crazy things like Conor McGregor self-inducting himself into the UFC Hall of Fame. And hopefully this situation will get resolved kind of like that, as in hopefully tomorrow. But if it doesn't, it's bad news for the UFC. And I guess I'll leave it there for right now. Ugh, I want this fight so bad.
National.
Now, usually I'll do two stories and Chris will do two stories, but today I have a lot to say about the Peter Liang and Akai Gurley case. First, I want to start off this segment by saying that not all cops are bad people. Bad people are bad people, and unfortunately, some bad people happen to be cops. But even in the case of Peter Liang, I don't believe that he himself is a bad person. He is in fact a person that messed up, and I believe that his mistake deserves to go punished, but I don't think that Peter Liang is a bad person. If you haven't heard about this case yet, let me take a second to fill you in really quickly. In 2014, Peter Liang was a rookie NYPD officer who was patrolling a project in Brooklyn. On the 7th floor, walking up to the 8th floor of the project, he heard a sound. The sound startled him and it caused him to fire his pistol. The bullet ricocheted off a wall and hit 28-year-old Akai Gurley in the chest, causing his death. Liang has since been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Now, April 19th, 2016, aka today, or tomorrow by the time you're watching this, is the day the final verdict for Peter Liang will be given. Liang could have faced as much as 15 years in prison for second-degree manslaughter. However, he was only sentenced to 5 years probation, 6 months house arrest, and 800 hours of community service. In response to the unfortunate death of Akai Gurley, many protests were held in New York saying that the community and his family deserve justice. And that's where things kind of start to get interesting. See, there hadn't yet been a cop in the state of New York who had been sentenced to any prison time for a shooting, but many Asian Americans have come out to say that the state is sending a message by trying to put Liang in prison for a longer amount of time, and they're waiting for a cop to commit a shooting that wasn't white, and that's why Liang's being charged the way he is. Even Liang's defense attorney came out and said that he didn't believe what happened was a crime, but rather just a tragic accident. And I have to say, I understand that it was an accident. I do not believe that in any way Liang meant to shoot Akai Gurley on that day. However, if I'm not paying attention to my speedometer when I'm driving, I get a ticket. It's an accident, but I still messed up, and I have to face the consequences. And although this is a much worse case, he still has to face the consequences for what he's done. Generally speaking, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this entire case. It's really weird and intricate. See, the reality of it is, I don't think that Peter Liang should have been on the force that day to begin with. He was a rookie cop, and it was obvious that he wasn't prepared to face the consequences of his actions. Even after he shot his pistol and he found out he had hit someone, he was too freaked out to go and help that person. Am I saying that he didn't care about that person? No, but many people think that might be what it is. But I think that it was just that he wasn't prepared to face the consequences of what he has done. He was too immature, and the NYPD put him out there on duty when he wasn't ready yet. And then when the racial side of this case comes into play, it gets all kinds of messed up. See, the black community seems to think that the state and the police department are out to get them, seeing as how many people have died in the past years. Whereas the Asian American community thinks that the state was out to get them, waiting for a cop who wasn't white to commit a crime to go out and set a precedent. It's odd, and it's something that I don't think we've quite seen before. It's a shame that cops in the past who have made worse mistakes than Liang didn't have to face punishments. But the reality is that Liang did mess up, and he should face a punishment which is rightful to his mistake. Cops in the past messed up even worse than him, and they didn't have to face a punishment. And that's not okay. But the fact of the matter is that it's not a problem that we're starting to punish cops for doing wrong. The fact of the matter is that we're starting so late. And when it comes to his sentence, I don't think it's too unfair. I do think that he has to face a punishment, which I've said now 100 times. And I think that the 5 years of probation along with the house arrest and community service are pretty rightful to what he's been given. We do have to remember, he has to live with the fact that he accidentally ended someone else's life. And I feel bad for him for that. It's a terrible thing to have to live with. At least I would assume as much. And even worse, I feel sorry for Akai Gurley's family who has to go on living with the death of a loved one.
International.
So recently there's been a lot going on in the news about how Carnival is going to start doing cruises to Cuba again. But this is making headlines for more than the fact that it's the first cruise line to go to the island in more than 50 years. You see, when Carnival announced this, many Cubans, especially in Miami, decided to book a spot on the cruise to go back to their homeland. But then they were told that they could not because they were from Cuba. You see, Cuba has a law from back in the Cold War era that prohibits Cubans from coming back to the island via boat. Now, the most recent development in this story is that Carnival has announced that it will be accepting bookings from Cuban people, and it has asked Cuba to reconsider the law. Now, Cuba's been silent on the issue, as they are with everything. Just like the call for Raul Castro to release the jailed political dissidents I talked about a while ago. Nothing. You'll get nothing out of them. So Carnival has said that if Cuba doesn't respond to their request to change the law by May 1st, they'll have to delay their voyages as well. I do see the original anger over Carnival not letting people book the cruises, but it is a law there. They can't go to the island according to Cuban law. So yes, while it would be discrimination, it wouldn't be the fault of Carnival. It would be the fault of Cuba, the place that they're trying to go back to. Which is just messed up on Cuba's side. Cuba is such an interesting place right now. But anyway, that's that. Let me know your opinion about this down below. I'm curious to think what other people think. Yo, thanks for watching this week's News by the Minute. I'm Chris Harris.
And I'm Ray Oliva. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter @blanketface. And if you have any ideas, email us at blanketface@gmail.com. That's not the real one. It's blanketfaceproductions@gmail.com.
All right, see you guys next week.
Bye.
If you want to see last week's News by the Minute, click here. Now, if you want to see the week before that News by the Minute, click here. They're both really good, so I'd have trouble deciding, but I'd probably pick this one. See ya.